Well, good evening again, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Judy Lubin with the Center for Urban and Racial Equity, and pleased that you are joining us for the final installment of our Conversations on Black Community Development webinar series. Tonight, our focus is to lift up key takeaways and action steps for us moving forward. And this is going to be an open mic session. Ron and I will, offer some key takeaways from the sessions over the past few weeks, but we want to hear from you. Ron, would you like to share a few opening thoughts before we move into our discussion?
Yes, thank you, Judy. And welcome again, everyone. And for those who are chiming in for the first time, I want you to know that this is a wonderful series of what we call kitchen table conversations that we've been having. And for those who've been on this journey with us since the beginning, for you, I say that none of these conversations that we've had are easy conversations. And when you talk about trying to do them within an hour and a half, there was so much we left on the table that we could have went down the road in terms of discussing. So I'm hoping that tonight your input will direct some future work that Judy and I are looking at doing as we move along the rest of this year. Your input is really important. I know that many of you haven't had the opportunity to share your thoughts, and so we want to give you that platform this evening to share your thoughts of what's going on in your local communities or what you see on the national stage in terms of the topics that we have been sharing over the last couple of weeks. So we're going to get started. We have some of you here, and but I'm mindful of time and your presence. And so, Judy, if you're ready to get started, I'm ready to get started.
Yeah, let's get started. So I thought I'd, first kind of do a quick overview, right? Like that we kicked off our conversation series back on the 21st, focusing on what is conscious community development and the importance of strengthening the Black ecosystems. And then from there, we had a session on imagining the reimagining Black neighborhoods, moving beyond the legacy of white dominant community development practices. And from there, we talked about urban and rural economic development, as well as wealth building strategies and policies for Black communities. And last week we had, a really powerful session on reparations. So there was a lot to absorb and to take in and to reflect on coming out of those sessions. And so we're going to try and unpack and do a quick overview of some of those. And we're doing this to, encourage you to think back, especially for those of you who have been on a number of these sessions. What were some of the key takeaways as we move into an open mic conversation? We can go to the next slide. Oh, yeah, I should mention, thank you. So launched today 7 issue briefs looking at structural racism in 7 cities: Philadelphia, San Francisco, St. Louis, DC, Miami, New Orleans, and New York. So we invite you to visit our website at urbanandracialequity.org to look at these issue briefs and these tools and resources. They feature facts and information on a number of different areas on the impact of gentrification on our communities, housing affordability crisis, health inequities, including COVID-19. And we're also highlighting the activities and activism and policy changes as equity that are happening in these cities. So now a lot of folks are asking, like, why these 7 cities? So these are 7 cities that CURE has been working in with partners over the past few years. And so we had originally decided to do these series as part of our own internal learning. And in the past 2 months, with all of the renewed interest and new interest in racial equity and racial justice or sharing these resources with the public. So I invite you to take a look at these briefs and to share them, and we hope that you find them useful as you are thinking about conscious community development. So in terms of some of the key takeaways from me coming out of this series, we wanted to first go back to the session last week, Ron, in terms of reparations. Dr. Winbush and our other panelists, really talked about, not only reparations from a historical perspective, but also reparations movements that are happening from a historical perspective and nationally, but also reparations movements that are happening locally as well. We've already seen in Evanston, Illinois, as well as in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina. Those city governments have enacted reparations programs. A major takeaway out of the conversation yesterday was that, there's last week is a significant movement around the bill, HR 40, that's in Congress right now.
Yes. And just to add to Judy, to that point, there are currently 3 states that need to be focused on in terms of getting congressional support for this House Bill 40. And those states are California, Florida, and Texas. So if you reside in any of those 3 localities, write letters to your congressional leadership and ask them to stand in support of this House Bill 40 in terms of the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations for African Americans. It's an important study I see going forward in terms of being able to frame and guide the discussion around reparations in the context of today's movements. Also, too, one of the takeaways that each of you can focus on in your own communities is to ensure that in your local governments, your city, county governments, with your state governments, that you're working on developing some type of racial equity framework that looks at the redistribution of resources to Black and other communities of color. And even let's talk about the poor communities that aren't receiving their fair share of resources. Many of these communities that we've been talking about over the last several weeks are communities where capacity and abilities and resources are lacking. And so we have to advocate for more of those kind of resources that can build sustainable organizations and actually infuse capital in the work that needs to be done. The third thing is just registering to vote, folks. I know that we're into a very critical time right now in our country. Our Democratic National Convention is happening today. It's been going on the last several days. The Republican Convention will be coming up shortly. But if we're going to change policies around this country, and particularly around some of the things that we see change needs to take place, then we're going to have to get out the vote. And we're going to have to make our opinions heard. The ballot box is the key. Lastly, and going back what Judy said earlier, these conversations that we've been having are very uncomfortable conversations for many. Race is an uncomfortable conversation in this country to talk about. But it is a conversation that needs to be spoken about. So a part of the education has to be folks educating themselves around the historical work that hasn't gone on, the policies and practices that drove enslavement, that drove Jim Crow, and that drove segregation in this country. And so I would certainly encourage you to read up as much as you can. Align yourself with other partners in your community. Have internal conversations in your own organizations in terms of how you are interacting with communities of color and leaders of color. The last thing I would say that we have to be able to do and be more conscious of is our advocacy. All these things that we're pointing out will not take place unless we build strong platforms of advocacy. So I know that as practitioners in the sectors that we work in, sometimes advocacy is not a part of our mission-driven work, but certainly it is certainly important to galvanizing and elevating this work that we are charged to do. So I would certainly say go back and maybe realign some of your mission work with an advocacy platform attached to it. So those are the takeaways I wanted to share along with Judy in terms of some things that came out of some of these webinars. So I want to put together a few slides that I wanted just to talk about briefly, and Judy mentioned earlier about conscious community and conscious community development, because I think it's important that we take into our work much more than just the physical development of communities, that we start to look at communities as being places that comprise not just physical space, but also there's emotional, spiritual, and a conscious space for communities. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what is your ultimate vision for Black communities? Because we have been focusing on Black communities, but let me just say, what is the ultimate vision for your own community? Is it to bring wholeness in complete agreement through alignment of individuals and a collective thought? That's what community is about, where we build relationships, we have relations. And so if we don't have those things going on in the community, then we have disengagement that happens. And so I want to just quickly just put that thought out there in terms of how you envision your community and the people in your community and how you try to work at connecting them. And so I do want to just also share a few thoughts. I know some of this is a big dive today because some of you may not work in the space that I work in, but there are three folds to a community. There's a spiritual fold, there's a mindful fold, and there's a body of a community. And all three of those things come together to make a whole community and a well community. And so let me just quickly share these three attributes with you. The spiritual nature of communities expressed through the physical form, but we know that everything starts in the realm of spirit. And so there are principles that guide all the work that we do. When we use the word karma, and we use it haphazardly sometimes, really not understanding what karma is. But we know good begets good, and bad begets bad. And we see in the time now that even in our country where we're seeing what negative thoughts can drive. And so you want to be very mindful of that. We are in a spiritual world, and while you may not even recognize it for the work that you do, there is an intersection where spirit connects people. So I would always say, let your spirit soar. Secondly, there's a conscious mind in the community, and that's symbolized by the intellectual thoughts and knowledge. And we take into account a community's collective experience. So we've been talking about, Black communities, and certainly one of the things I say all the time, communities have a vibration, and things are in energy flow. So to put your thoughts and your knowledge into a collective experience helps to govern your your affairs, your creativity. So think in terms of that, your spirit, your mind. And when you put your spirit together with your mindful thoughts, you start to build out the body of a community. Because the body of a community is that to which is operating in the physical realm. So we know nothing happens and everything happens through thought. We envision it and then we bring it into manifestation before us. So if you can wrap your thoughts around spirit, mind, and body, and wrap your work around those three elements, then you drive yourself towards what I would say is developing a conscious community, a community that brings people together, where people aren't feeling like strangers, they're feeling a kinship to each other, and they're collectively participating in the process of sustaining and growing the place that they see as home, the place they see as community. So I wanted just to share those three things with you this evening to frame out um, where we're going with this conversation, but also to, I hope that some of this, what I've just shared with you, that you take back and explore. We're certainly available to talk more with you, but I did want to put this thought out there that a spirit, mind, and body is what composes a community. So, Judy, um, is that the next slide? Okay. So, where we're at now? Well, we're gonna cease to talk for a moment, and now is our time to listen to you. Um, we ask that you raise your hands for any comments you might want to bring into this conversation, this kitchen table conversation this evening, because I know that all of you have thoughts around how you've been doing your work. And so I'm always open to learning new ways and to do things, and I learn from sharing with others. So feel free to raise your hand and chime in wherever you think you want to chime in this conversation. Maybe it was something that was said along one of these webinars, and maybe it might not have been said. And so that you might want to bring a new discussion into this discussion this evening. And again, as I said, we're going to keep this mic open and this interaction open up until 8:30, and then we'll be signing off for the evening. Okay.
So while we're waiting for audience members to share your thoughts, I wonder if we can go back a few slides to my takeaways slide, Sienna. Thank you. Yeah, so other takeaways I wanted to lift up is community wealth building. That came through really strongly, particularly in our second session, the second webinar. And the call there was for us to really think about, how we promote ownership, right? In the sense that, in many of our communities, there isn't a sense of ownership, right? That we don't own the assets in our communities. And so as we're thinking about conscious community development, what are the strategies like co-ops and social entrepreneurship that really help to build a sense of ownership?
Mm.
Yep.
Well, one of the things that that we've been driving through this discussion is that we want to take a step back and do a self-examination of how we're doing the work that we're doing, whether it's in affordable housing, whether it's health related, whether it's culturally related. How are we doing the work that we're doing that's building a sense of ownership for the folks that, quote, we're serving? So that is one of the biggest challenges I see going forward, because I know that in our own space, we all want to feel that what we're doing is important and helping and to grow folks. And the question becomes, yes, we may be doing that, but when do we begin to bring people into a sense of owning the process so that they feel connected to what is happening in their community and how things are being driven in terms of decisions? Or are they just now in our work making that ethnocentric decision that we know what is best for the community? And
Mhm.
so still there's work to be done around that. And that dismantling has to take place, individually, within individuals who are working in organizations, and building up a platform in the organization that says that we're going to be inclusive and we're going to do the outreach. We're going to do the work of bringing people into the room of decision making, and we're going to share that decision with that group of decisions with them, so they can feel a sense of ownership.
Mhm.
Um, I think one of the questions always arises when particularly during times we have protests and people sometimes may burn buildings in their community. Well, unfortunately, if they don't feel a sense that those buildings being a part of their decision making, or they take ownership of what the building represents, then you know what? It doesn't matter to them.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter to them. And so, again, raising the question about how are we doing the work that's doing. I told a story during the early stages about a comment I heard Maya Angelou make some sometime when she had a gathering at her house, and she stumbled on, while serving drinks to her guests, she stumbled on a gentleman who was articulating all this hatred around gays and lesbians, and so she kindly got his coat, gave it to him, and asked him to leave her house, because in her house that was not tolerated. And why do I bring this up? I bring this up because so many times we see the ills of what we do or what others do, and we don't bring that to the attention of those individuals or organizations. And I think we do them a misjustice when we can't put the mirror in front of their face and say, hey, have you really looked at what you're doing? I'm going to hold you accountable. So accountability has risk tied to it. And sometimes we're not at a point where we want to risk being accountable because we're worried about fragmentating the relationship, or the relationship, or the person that we're talking to, or the issues that we're raising may not be accepted. But if we're going to be intentional around this work of working across color lines, income lines, wealth lines, then there has to be some truth that we work with.
Mhm.
Hmm. Conscious truth.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good stuff, Ron. As you were speaking, I was reminded, in the conversation that we had about um, community wealth building and capacity building is, how do we build and support our organizations to be sustainable, but also in terms of how we're shifting power to communities, right? And to those who are most directly impacted by decisions. And I remember, um, we talked about um, education, right? Around like planning, the planning processes and the development processes, so that community can really have a say in those processes, because we understand, how development and planning works. And that's part of the capacity building as well, right? That it's not, just come to this meeting and share your thoughts, which is important, but, there's a different level of engagement that can happen, because folks really understand how the decision-making processes are unfolding, and when and where to intervene before projects that, say gets further down the line. And so what are those tools and resources, to really educate people and bring folks along? And in DC, Empower DC had a whole series of workshops around the comprehensive plan, right? Grassroots education around a comprehensive plan. And the average person probably doesn't know what a comprehensive plan is, right? And so that type of grassroots education, I think, is important and critical, as we're thinking about how do we ensure that planning and community development activities really, capture the voice of the people that are going to be impacted and affected by these decision makings, right? And so sort of shining light or opening a window on this process of the comprehensive plan, right, that people may know about, right, but that this document is going to set the trajectory for development activities that happen over the next 10 to 20 years in your community. And so I think, that sort of exemplifies to how some of this popular education needs to be happening.
Yes, there's a question someone has. Are we going to open their mic so they can share their thoughts around this question? Okay, well let's repeat the question then. The person who asked the question: what city and local policy changes could help build Black-owned businesses? Great question. Great question.
Yeah, good question, right? So a couple of things come to mind is, certainly what we call set aside programs, especially at the city government or county government level, right, at minimum, and most of them do have goals in terms of how what they're supposed to spend, contracting with women businesses and with minority or people of color owned businesses. And so that's one way that local city and local policy changes could help. I think oftentimes those goals don't go far enough. I was just looking at a city that's almost 50% Black, and their goal is 25% minority business enterprise. And so for me, if a city is 50% Black, why is it the goal 50%, And some will say, well, there may not be as many businesses that are available or ready to take advantage of these contracting opportunities. But oftentimes the bar is set really low, right? So if the goal is high, then that means we need to work harder to get there, right? So I think, we should be looking at what are those goals at the city and government level. We also want to see entrepreneurship programs as well as incubators, right? That you're not just a training program, but to the extent that you're able to really provide support for businesses in the first 1 to 3 years, I think is really, really critical as well, because you're in that infancy stage of a business where a lot can go wrong, or you can become discouraged. And so how do we network entrepreneurs together to provide that support along the way as you're developing a business?
Well, let me take this down to the root level in terms of asking the question: how are you or your organization funneling resources to support Black businesses? Because I think that's the basic, for me, the basic tenement of supporting Black businesses. I think that folks need to build into their framework, their organizational culture, the importance of doing business with particularly white organizations. Need to focus on how they're building Black businesses, particularly when they're working in neighborhood-based settings. I think that is so critical that you look at and seek out Black businesses as your vendors. Seek out those financial institutions that support Black businesses. And when you don't have them in your city, then you need to come around in coalitions and develop those entities, because that's a part of the lack of capacity that we see going on in so many Black neighborhoods, where we don't have institutional buffers there to augment the work. And so what happens? Well, I can't find nobody. Nobody's there. Well, when you see that it's a vacant desert where there is no Black business operating in, then put a part of your internal conscious building that you're going to work at supporting and growing some Black businesses. That's what I think is real important. And again, getting back to this question about advocacy, that you have to put that as a part of your framework, because power concedes nothing. And so people can get very comfortable, local governments get very comfortable, procurement officers can get very comfortable in terms of doing business with the people they're comfortable doing business with, until they challenge to act and be different. No one's asking for giveaways. And I want to go deep down this little rabbit hole. No Black business is asking for giveaways. What they're asking for is a fair opportunity to compete. And that's what has happened over this 401 years of enslavement, Jim Crowism, and separate powers around segregation. No Black community wants to be poor and destitute, but without the resources and the intentionality around growing, it becomes what it becomes. And so I think that we all, again, have to go back and ask ourselves some real questions. Because one of the questions I said earlier about being spiritual, can we continue to see deprivation, economic deprivation, social deprivation, cultural deprivation go on in communities and expect communities to grow, and yet we claim wholeheartedly that we're doing work on the behalf of the community? Wealth building has to be a part of every organization. Every business has to have that as a number one priority for the Black community, helping to build wealth. By 2053, the statistics are saying Black wealth will be zero in this country. Right now, the average Black household net worth is about $14,000 compared to over $120,000 for white families. Wealth is everything. It gives you access to education. It gives you access to health care. It determines where you live. It determines what you eat. And when we don't have this as a priority, as a business, or as an organization, as a part of our mantra, then we have to be asking ourselves the question, truly, what are we doing and who are we benefiting?
Well, amen to that, right? And even at the individual level, right? It takes being conscious and intentional, right? Are you looking for a Black insurance agent, accountant, all these services that we rely on either individually or for our organizations. And so there's really no excuse in terms of saying they don't, these businesses, these Black businesses don't exist, right? They're here, and we just have to look for them. We have to be intentional.
Okay.
It looks like we have someone to speak.
Yeah.
Catrice.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi. I had a question. What are some tips you have for organizations and institutions seeking out Black businesses? What are some steps they can take to work on themselves before they seek it out? Because I've seen people seek out things in the mindset of serve and saving people, which can be counterproductive and not seeing that person as equal. So what are some tips people can do internally in the organizational structure as well as individually before they start seeking people out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question.
Can you repeat that for me? It got sort of distorted on my end. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Catrice was asking. Oh, Catrice, are you there?
Yeah. I want to repeat it.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure. I was saying, what is some work that an individual can do and then an organization can do on the organizational culture as well as the individual themselves before they start to seek out Black businesses and marginalized groups to work with? I've seen people kind of seek people out as a serve kind of model, save kind of model, and that can be counterproductive because you don't see the person as your equal. So what are some tips individually and organizational wise, culture wise you can do before you do that seeking?
Great. You want to go ahead, Judy, address it? I have some points. Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, especially at this moment where we're seeing white folks and non-Black people of color interested in Black struggle and Black issues and want to help, right? And oftentimes that shows up through what we call white saviorism, right? Or this charity model, which a lot of our nonprofits organizations are founded around this charity model, that the people that you're serving, you're seeing them as people in need, and that they need you and your organization and your resources. There may be some truth to that, but we really want folks to really start thinking about how are you moving from this model of outreach and this need framework or this deficit framework to an asset framework, and a framework in which you see the communities and the people that you're in service to as partners, right, and not recipients. The partners that you're consulting with and that you're in a equitable relationship with. And so, when we do work at Cure with organizations around these issues, we go through a whole training focused on shared language and analysis and power shifting, and really, asking people to think critically about the way that they go about designing and delivering their programs and services, because they often come from this charity model or this saviorism model. And so that's work that folks have to do individually and organizationally. It's challenging for people sometimes, especially when they think of our communities as lacking or needing things. And I think a lot of that comes also from not understanding our communities, right? And so coming in from the outside may have really good intentions, but end up causing harm. And so we encourage people to pause, right? Sometimes you want to get out there and do something, but pause and do that individual level work and reflection, reading and talking. We encourage what we call race-based caucusing, especially for white folks who are interested in being in support and solidarity. Black people is work out some of your issues amongst, other white folks, before and then before you just come into our communities and not having worked out your own internalized what we call internalized racist superiority, right? Because that's what it often is, the root at this, right? Is that people have internalized this idea of white superiority, and it shows up sometimes as saviorism, right? And so we want people to understand what that is, and how do you shift, right? It takes a paradigm shift and a power shift. It takes listening, right? Listening to folks who are most impacted, listening to our communities before you come in from the outside and trying to push an agenda program without having really built the relationships and having been in consultation with our communities.
Patrice, I just wanted to add to what Judy said. I think one of the things that we don't do enough in this country is truth telling. I think a lot of the perceptions and attitudes about people are built on falsehoods. And so we have to really be very intentional now about not saying I don't know, because there's too many ways now to find out about people and the history of a people. And so whether it's Black America, Hispanic America, Asian America, and even poor white America, we have to be able to educate ourselves about the pathologies that have occurred over years and years and years in this country. They have told some wrongful stories about people that have kept them divided. But that's going to take work. That takes work individually, and it takes work collectively. So if we are going to try to change things in the work around the work we do, first of all, we change it first by changing ourselves and our own individual attitudes. And then, as I said earlier about the story about Maya Angelou, when you see wrong, you call it to what it is. You have to be able to call it to what it is. And that takes courage. I said, I put in this mailer that all the presenters that we've had on this webinar series have taken on some very courageous conversations. Tough conversations are going on now in this country that we've never had before. But I think for me, they're great conversations because we've pushed them under the rug for so long, and we told the untruth for so long. So the education is critical to gaining and redefining a new pathway going forward. And I think once we put ourselves on that journey of learning and growing and educating ourselves about others, I think we can begin to appreciate individuals and recognize them in a humane way. Recognize them as individuals who want the same things that everybody else wants. Every Black family wants the same opportunities to send their kids to school, to give them a livelihood that they can move and create their own self-independence, want to live in a good home in a great neighborhood. The wants and needs are no different for any group of people. And so there's work to be done. There's work to be done, and the work, first of all, begins with each of us in the work we do individually and how we bring others along on that journey with us. So I hope that we share some tidbits around this question that you asked about the work that individuals and organizations can do. But if you continue along the road that you continue on, getting the same results that you get, as Miss Fannie Lou Hamer said, that's a sense of insanity. You have to change. And change is the toughest thing that any of us can do. Changing our thinking, changing our habits. Change is the toughest thing anyone can do, or any organization can do, or for that matter, any country can do. But if you're going to grow and grow collectively, and as has been said, to make this a true place of diversity and inclusion, we're going to need to really focus on change as a country, as communities. So I hope that was something that in that vegetable garden I just laid out, I hope there was something that you could pick up and replant somewhere else.
Yeah, and so just to add a couple other things as you were talking, Ron, that came up for me was people also need to think about how they perceive leadership. Right? That we've been taught leadership shows up in a certain way, right? That you're supposed to talk a certain way, you're supposed to be polished and all this, that's leadership, right? And that type of presentation is what's valued in a lot of our institutions, and even in informal settings, right? And so I think part of this is also trusting people, right? The voices of everyday people, of people who are impacted. It's how the knowledge and the experiential knowledge and experience that we value, right? That you don't need to have gone to school or have been privileged to walk certain halls to know what change you need and want to see in your community, right? And so how we prioritize different types of knowledge and experience, I think, is also an important part of this conversation as well, that sometimes people struggle with, that we have to break a lot of these messages and ideas that we've been socialized very early on, in terms of what we respect and what we value.
There's a question from someone in the audience that says, I like the approach of set-asides to support community and businesses. However, on a policy level, how can we initiate and enforce? Because as you both have pointed out, there is a significant wealth gap and Black folks have miles to catch up. That's why we're talking about reparations.
Mm-hmm.
If the incomes would stay at they were right now, it would take Black folks 224 years to catch up with the wealth of white families. That's if the household incomes of the wealth gap stay where they were right now. 224 years, which is improbable and frankly impossible. So how do we rebuild Europe after after World War II? We had the Marshall Plan, where $15 billion was invested to rebuild Europe. Germany paid reparations to Jews that were persecuted during the Nazi reign in Germany. Asian Americans were paid reparations as a part of their internment here in the United States. And so we've seen throughout history where healing opportunities have came about because people, first of all, admitted some wrongdoing and gave compensation for that wrongdoing. I'm thinking back to Carmen Noble, who was one of our panelists on reparations last week, and she said the analogy was, yeah, you can break my car windows, but I want you to pay for it. I accept your apology, but I still want you to pay for it.
Mhm.
And so I think that what we're saying and what we've come to understand, there was wrongs done throughout the history of against the people that limited their wealth ability, their ability to build wealth. They were shut out of the housing market for almost 60 years. Then there was Jim Crow, black codes. There's been one scenario after another over the 401 years of black folks being in this country. We had, again, we had 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, and 60 years of separate but equal. George Floyd said, "Get your knee off my neck." And I think that we have to come to grips with this as a country in terms of where Black America is, where Native America is, and other communities in terms of getting the knee off the neck. These young folks who have been protesting have been very clear about what they see as the spoils of capitalism. And I wouldn't say that capitalism is all bad, but when it's a system that purposely shuts out people and their ability to live a whole and healthy life, then it comes a time where we have to re-examine whether those policies and practices are consistent with us as a people. That we can now say, no, let's look at changing and transforming our economic structure where we can bring more people into the fold and allow them to create more opportunities. Because based on what we know now, we could never catch up. It's improbable, it's impossible to catch up if I had to work on my salary. And yes, there's a few, and I will give that credit, but everybody's not singing, everybody's not rapping, everybody's not playing basketball, everybody's not playing football. That young woman who's trying to raise her kids and a family, she needs a leg up. She needs an opportunity. Her kids need an opportunity. And we know we have the resources to do it. And that's the telling point. We have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
So if anything, this pandemic has shown us we do have resources. Now, how do we apply those resources to make a more equitable America for opportunities for everyone? We lost 400,000 Black businesses since March. 400,000 Black businesses have now gone away out of the thaws of small business. That's a significant loss of wealth and opportunity, economic opportunity that has been taken away as a result of this pandemic. And that doesn't mean that we have lost businesses of all colors, but when you lose 400,000 business from a community that was already at the bottom of the totem pole, that is significant. That is significant. So yeah, so I agree with you. There's a significant wealth gap, and Black folks have miles to catch up. But we can certainly put that on steroids and inject the resources that is needed to rebuild Black America in the same way that we built Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we don't catch up without targeted race conscious policies, right? And so that's where, you know, the local reparations movements and activities, I think are really important. There's also some pilots going on across the country in terms of guaranteed income. Is also, another potential policy strategy for us to be thinking about as well. In Stockton, California, there's a pilot right now under Black Mayor Tubbs, where I'm not sure what the exact number is, but several thousand residents are receiving, something like $1,000 a month. And there are ideas around something like this, right? There are national versions, but also, we're seeing that cities and, local governments could also think about implementing something like this as well, a guaranteed income. And so those are, some things we need to be thinking about. Jobs guarantee, has also been pushed as well, in terms of wealth building. I know, of course, it's not just about income, but when we can't even stabilize our income, right? How do you build wealth? And so, strategies where, a job for anyone who wants one, and that those programs be specifically targeted, to our communities that have experienced chronic unemployment, in large part because of racism in the job market. It looks like we have Ronnie Lucas that wants to speak. Ronnie?
Is Ronnie still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can. Hi, Ronnie.
Hey, I'm doing very well. How you all doing? Yeah, but anyway, this is my first one. I was invited. This is my first one. I missed the previous webinars. I can just say, number one, I'm very happy to see that these type of activities are going on, presently. Referring to the comment that I made with the Black Entrepreneur Coaching Program, it happens to be my own program. I am president of Platinum Dynamic Institute. And been doing this teaching. I actually started out more so with real estate because I've been involved with real estate for a long time, like more than 30 years. I've been in the business, and I coached and mentored, people who wanted to be investors or who actually wanted to improve their skill sets as an agent. But academically, I do have a master's. My master's happens to be in business management, and I completed a program through Harvard University just this year in entrepreneurship in emerging economies. And so what I've done is kind of put a number of things together. And with this particular program that I'm speaking of, it's kind of like in 3 phases. With the first phase, build self-esteem. How is that done? Basically, let me put it like this. To love your history is to love yourself. The better understanding you have of your history, the better you're just going to feel about self. So what I have taken the liberty to spend lots and lots of hours and time to go back and do a lot of research back in antiquity to bring that history and to couple it with a lot of things that's been done since we have been here in the U.S. and to bring this. I mean, this is information that you're just not going to get out of a history book. I didn't get it in grade school. I didn't get it in college. This is information that you got to go dig in to get it, but it's incorporated into it. The second phase, the first phase is referred to as Kunga. The second is Business in Motion, and it's a condensed version of an MBA. That's what the participant will receive. And in other words, I'm teaching how to build a business system, how to build turnkey systems within that business so that they can be scaled. And then the third component has to deal with getting that business funded. And so let me put it like this. Over the past about 6 years, even though I've stated that my business and expertise primarily has been in real estate, but what I did is I took a little hiatus and I got involved in international business consulting. And my focus was working with countries in Africa and also Latin America. And, just in reality, what's going on, what we're trying to accomplish here with Black people, I'm speaking of, it's happening pretty much all over the world. You go to Brazil, you go down to Bahia. Bahia is a state. You're talking 75, 80% of the people are of African descent. They got these same conversations just like we're having. It's going on there. If you look at the African continent, the same thing is going on. So I'm saying, I don't know, maybe it's our ancestors coming back, speaking to us, and have, put our heads in this direction. But one thing I think that African American is blowing a major opportunity is that connection back with the motherland. And I'll say this and then I'll hush, but a lot of my work just over the past 5 years I've been working with governors, ministers, even helped the president, the newly elected president of the Congo. My partner and I worked with him to get him elected. And they have basically extended so many opportunities to the African Americans, just numerous things. And presently I am working with the Minister of Mining, and there's just so many opportunities that are given. I said, there's no way, my partner, we can't take them all. So what can I do? The best thing is to come back and teach others, bring this back to the community, and to teach others how to function as entrepreneurs. But we can go a step further, can actually connect the people with these opportunities and teach them how to go about getting funding. And I'll put it like that.
Thank you, Ronnie. Drop the name of your program for us again.
Sure, I'll say it, and then I'll put it in the box. Anyway, my company is Platinum Dynamic Institute, and you can go to the internet and you'll find it, platinumdynamicinstitute.com, just like it sounds. The program is the Sankofa Business Alliance Afro Entrepreneurship Coaching Program. It's a 90-day coaching program. It can be done virtually. All I can say is very powerful, lots of information, and it's a very effective program.
Thank you, Ronnie. Sounds like you're doing really great work, and I like the concept. This relates something, Ron, to something we were talking about a couple of days ago in terms of building up the next generation and also thinking about sustainability. So how do we transfer skills and build knowledge and confidence, to be able to do the work, for those of us that are, in organizations and we're thinking about sustainability, but in terms of, specifically in this conversation about building and supporting businesses, right? And for our businesses to be sustainable, right? That there is some coaching and training and support that entrepreneurs need, particularly in the early phases of those businesses.
Ronnie, I really appreciate your comments, and I'm going to reach out to you because one of the things that we're doing here in the District of Columbia and working in Baltimore is that we're establishing we've established 2 cooperative academies where we're working with individuals in terms of how to build collectively owned businesses. And so I would like to talk with you, and I will be contacting you to extract some of your knowledge and some of your, and see if there's a willingness to participate in helping these newly formed startup cooperative businesses grow. But George Fraser has a saying that when spiders unite, they can tackle a lion. When spiders unite, they can tackle a lion. And what is he saying? He's saying just to what you're saying. When people are united, they can do the work that they need to do to build anything that they choose to do. Because I am a firm believer that the gifts that we all are entrusted with and been embedded with from our Creator is already there for us. And so I would also say to you to say this here, is that racism is just not relegated, as you well noted, to the United States. It went worldwide. And a part of the insidiousness of racism is that it was a system that kept people divided based on color, based on height, based on geographical location. And then when you put capitalism inside of that, racism was about making money. It's about economics. Racism is profitable. Even today, it is still profitable. So that education that I shared with Katis earlier, it's the same education I'll share with all of us, that we have to educate ourselves. And we have to really align ourselves back to the self. I mean, the real self, not just the made up self that, wears certain clothes or drives a certain car. I'm talking about skimming away that about who you are spiritually and how you see yourself connected to 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 your community, and how you see yourself being living and acting in a very intentional and mindful way about how you do what you do. And so I'm really interested in talking with you more about your experiences and how can we connect. And I'm taking your information down at this particular moment. So thank you for your comments. So Judy, is there something you want to while we are here? We're closing in about another 20 minutes, and let's see if we can get some more other good dynamic conversation on the table before we close out for the evening.
Yeah, so we have some discussion prompts for folks, and this is the two of them here. What do we need to focus on most from a community development perspective, and how can we build capacity and enact change in our own communities and workplaces? So just some two questions for you to think about. So while we're waiting to hear from others, if we can go back to my takeaway slide. Thank you. Yeah, so on knowledge building, right? So I think we just had a really good example from Ronnie's comments in terms of the importance of knowledge building. And so I think this came, I think all of our sessions have been about this, right? Implicitly and explicitly has been about knowledge building and knowledge sharing from the speakers that we've had participate in the webinar series, as well as from participation from audience members sharing resources and asking questions. We wanted to note, right, that this month is Black August, right? That is encouraging these types of conversations and sharing of resources and tools. For us to build our knowledge base, and history is a key part of this, right? That we want to understand the history and the historical processes that have led us to this from history, for us to understand and carry forward as we're thinking about a new vision, and reimagining our communities and reimagining this whole country, right? Through a lens of racial justice and equity and self-determination for Black people and Black communities. So related to this theme, right? We encourage and invite you to share any resources that you'd like, to share with audience members in the chat. Earlier at the beginning, I shared that we just released 7 issue briefs on structural racism in 7 cities that we're offering on our website at urbanandracialequity.org. That is in the same spirit of knowledge building and knowledge sharing to then facilitate action, to facilitate movement, and to support the activities that are happening. That's working to redirect us and move us in a direction that we need to be seeing momentum and movement around, right? And so resources, and tools, are really critical and important in this moment.
One of the conversations that we've touched on, but we really haven't, because of the time constraints that we're working with, we haven't given a lot of dialogue around, is the question around trauma and the trauma that has happened in Black communities and that still is happening today. Trauma. And so the question always becomes, why can't Black folks do for themselves? What is stopping them? They have all the opportunity. They can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I don't understand why. And so let me just, in a quick synopsis, tell you why that narrative is an incorrect narrative. Because when you take a person's dignity, their self-worth, and you continually extract at it, it becomes very, very difficult to overcome. It moves you to become a self-believer about yourself. And so what is needed? Yes, we talked about access to capital, and we talked about reparations, but also too self-worth, having you to believe in yourself. I mentioned earlier about the vibrations in communities. And so right now, spiritually, we have to elevate the vibrations in Black communities. And not just Black communities, all communities that have been shut out and fragmented and pushed aside. We got to find ways to start to pull more energy and vibration into those communities. One part is, yes, engagement, getting communities engaged. The other thing is having folks elevate their belief about who they are, and in recognizing that, yes, they do have self-worth. They are someone that can become whomever they choose to be. And so when we look at Black communities, we have to be able to infuse that kind of thinking in Black communities. And so it's not going to happen all by the work of Blacks. It's going to take, as always, the will of good people from all walks of life to work with Black communities, to work with Black entrepreneurs, to work with the Black spiritual community, to work with Black educators, to work with Black entrepreneurs. It's going to take that kind of collective work to redefine how communities can look and how we can start repairing some of this harm that has been placed upon a people. Yeah. I wish we had more time to really delve into these kind of topics. I hope that working with Cure, that we can come back in some time in the next couple months and maybe put together another series. Because this is how we're communicating now. We're communicating virtually. We don't meet in conferences or symposiums and things of that nature as we did prior to March. But I would certainly look forward to bringing back some new conversations around how we are going to be moving forward, particularly after November the 3rd. So I'm looking forward to November the 3rd and a change, that I see that's going to happen in this country. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ron. Yeah, I think this is something we should definitely come back to. When we see this theme of harm and trauma coming up a lot in the conversations and the work that we do at CURE, we're often asked to facilitate conversations, particularly in the past couple months as a result of the George Floyd protests, facilitates conversations and spaces specifically for Black employees or specifically for staff of color, right? And that, you know, we can't be asked to just continue to operate as business as usual and not recognize that we are experiencing, you know, individual and collective trauma and harm, and that, you know, in this particular movement, right, that a moment and movement, right, that, you know, in addition to the change and the work that needs to happen, we also need to be thinking about self-care, you know, and healing, right, that's also part of the movement work as well. I've been really, you know, happy to see, right, that, you know, the themes around Black joy, right, that it's not all about Black pain. You know, we also need to create space and carve out space, you know, to celebrate, you know, to be joyful, to be happy, to find those things, you know, that feed our spirit, and to not, you know, feel ashamed, you know, or embarrassed that we are finding pockets of time and spaces to enjoy ourselves, right? Because that's important too, right? Because how do we sustain the movement and the work, right, if we're not taking care of ourselves and creating space for love and joy and for justice to show up in different ways? It's not all about, you know, going hard and being angry all the time, right? That you know, we have to, you know, find, you know, we don't want to be angry all the time, right? Like that's why we're on the streets, right? That we want to get to a place where we can actually live and breathe, right? And what does it mean for Black people to actually be able to breathe? You know, I think is very much, you know, at the heart of this question about healing and trauma, right? Is that we want to breathe. You know, we want to be able to breathe and exist without feeling like we have, you know, the knee is on our neck, right? And so how do we make sure that we are thinking about, you know, the need for healing and self-care, especially in this moment? Looks like we have a question that has come in. So a question about the importance of getting involved in the comprehensive plans. What outreach methods work best to get people involved in the planning process? Yeah, so I would really encourage to look at the work of, and there may be other models around the country, but, you know, two organizations, Empower DC and One DC, two separate organizations, but, you know, two groups that are doing a lot of grassroots organizing that's building power around these issues. And it's not just one event, right? You know, sometimes we think about, oh, we're going to have one community event. It's a process, right, of inviting people to learn and to be in collaboration, and in you know, and helping to redefine what their cities look like and their neighborhoods look like. And so one of the key processes of organizing is what they call the one-on-ones, right? Is when you see people who are interested, is that you do that individual outreach, right? That it's not just, you know, how do we reach as many people as possible? It's also those one-on-one, you know, connections and having conversations and saying, hey, I see you're really interested in this. You know, I wonder if you might, you know, be willing to volunteer, or would you be interested in making phone calls, or we have this training program that I think you'd be great for, right? And we all know, like those instances when someone specifically reached out to you, and invited you or said that they noticed something that you were doing like that, that has a different type of an impact than just a mass email or a mass invitation to come and be a part of something. And so, it takes additional work, but sometimes that's what's needed and required, right? Because it's often those handful of people that you've built up and supported and invested in, that then do the same with others, in terms of helping to educate and reach people and expand, to their networks, right? And so how do we think about, not just so the traditional models of how we think about outreach, but also some other ways in order for us to be able to connect with people.
I want to add to that question. Our communities, and I'm talking about communities comprised of organizations and individuals, have to demand accountability from local government. Now, what am I suggesting? I said earlier that accountability, there's risk to being accountable. And embedded within local government is some fear if I become more accountable, or if I educate the community more, it's like they're going to overthrow me. So, excuse me. So, what is needed? We have to be able to demand a more involved, engaged process, a more participatory process with our governments, our local governments, our state governments, our federal governments. But because without that bridge building of participation, our voices become silent. Our voices aren't even in the room. So one of the examples that's going on right now is in Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland has, in their planning department, has put together a program called the Planning Academy, where they're bringing in community folks to understand the planning process. They're taking them through an educational awareness process so they can understand how planning is done. And that's probably, I think it may be operating somewhere else, but I know it's operating in Baltimore. And it's unique. And it's transparent in terms of the transparency that it's building among community and a city agency that's been charged with overseeing the planning and zoning of the city. It allows the community to have an input, not just an input, but a knowledgeable input on how the planning process unfolds. And so for those of you who are interested in understanding that, you can go to baltimorecity.gov website, go into their planning department, and take a look at what they're doing, working with local communities around planning and how they're engaging community in the process. I do believe, yes, I believe in advocacy, but I don't think every relationship has to be adversarial. I'm a real proponent of advocacy, but every relationship doesn't have to be adversarial. There can be relationships that hold the intentionality around cooperation, when we recognize that we're both working in the best interest of the whole. So I would certainly share that with you going forward. We're about 5 minutes to go, Judy. I want to take us back and start going back to some of these takeaways, because I want to leave our audience with at least these takeaways as they go forward. I hope these takeaways they put as high priority on their to-do list, that they continue to follow these takeaways and they also put some intentionality around making sure that they are in places where they're not in place. And if you need some guidance or need some collaboration to make some of these things happen, you can reach out to Cure, or you can reach out to NDCC in terms of our network. Here our Twitter and our websites. We're open to partner with you, because it only benefits us when we all take ownership of our issues and take ownership of creating solutions. So I do want to just emphasize this House Bill 40 on reparations. It's coming up on the floor. I mentioned 3 states that we need to focus on getting some lift from: California, Florida, and Texas. So we get this bill to the floor so it can get debated and we can come to some resolve this year in terms of moving forward with this enactment. November the 3rd, a big day in this nation. It's the day that we all vote nationally. Choose your vote and honor your vote. There's a lot of people who preceded us who gave their lives for this right to vote. And then I know that there's a lot of suppression going on now around suppressing the vote, but we have to forge forward and make your candidate, whomever that is, known through your voting at the ballot box. And I said something earlier about educating ourselves, and I say this to whites as well as to African Americans. We have to be able to educate ourselves, because not only do whites have misnomers about the history of Black America, many Blacks have been miseducated about the history of Black America. So certainly, I would certainly encourage you to put yourself in as a student and start to learn and share your experiences with family, friends, and particularly those who you work with as well. The last thing is that I will say that if we talk about fairness and being equitable, that we need to have practices and policies in place to ensure that things are done in such a way that everyone is given a fair opportunity. So I would certainly encourage you to look at your local governments, your state governments, and even internally your own organizations to see what your equity framework is in terms of working with businesses and color, and how you're working in communities of color. So those are my last and closing thoughts. Judy, do you want to close out with something before we sign off for the evening?
Yeah, thank you so much for all that you shared, Ron. I think you left us with some, some food for thought. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us over the past few weeks. We know that there have been some folks who've been here probably for every session, or most of them, and so we appreciate you, whether this is your first session or you've been on multiple ones. We know that there's a lot going on, and so it means a lot, and it says a lot that you're making time to be in conversation and to be in community with us. Even in this type of format, which can be a challenge, right? Because we can't see you, but we know you're there, and you've been chiming in and participating in the chat, and so we really appreciate the ways in which you all have contributed to the conversation, and so thank you. I want to thank Ron and Sienna from the NDCC side, and Chantel from the Cure side for the work and the collaboration and the partnership that we've had over the past few weeks and months in organizing this webinar series. I'm encouraged through the work that we've been doing in terms of thinking about collaboration and partnership, because this is what we need to move forward. And I think it's important for us to model that, right? As we're thinking about, you know, it's not enough for us to just talk about collaborations and partnerships and stop working in silos, that we also need to be primary things that we are recommending. And so, you know, I think it's just a call for us to continue to think about who we need to be networking with and thinking about in large ways, but also in sometimes what might seem like small ways, but still important and in critical ways in terms of partnership, be it, you know, someone to bounce ideas off on, but also in terms of thinking about what we put out into the world, right? You know, as we're, you know, talking about, you know, consultation and ownership being key to how we think about conscious Black community development. I echo Ron's push, you know, in terms of voting, right? That, you know, or get those requests for your mail-in ballots because of all that we know that's already happening to suppress our votes, and that's part of our realities in this country, right? That the Black vote, our access to the ballot has always been restricted and has always been tenuous. And so how do we, particularly in this moment, knowing that we need to see a shift in the White House, and we need to see shifts locally as well, but particularly right now, we need to see a shift. And as we're thinking about, you know, which politicians and elected officials really align with a vision for racial justice and for equity. You know, how are we over the next couple of weeks really going to mobilize and encourage and push our family members, our friends, our networks, you know, to really get out this November. So I hope that you all will keep in contact with us. Our website address and Twitter addresses are here as well. Both of us are also on Facebook. I also want to make a last plug for our new 7 resources on structural racism in 7 cities. And even though these focus on specific cities, I think there are things to learn from each of them, even if these may not be in cities that you're located in or where you're working in. And we encourage you to take a look at what's happening in these cities and where there might be opportunities for lessons to be learned and for reaching out and connecting with organizations, so that, you know, where folks are doing things that are interesting and innovative, that we're also, you know, building those connections and trying those things where it makes sense in our local communities. With that, we're going to say good night. We wish you well. Be well and be safe.
Be well, be safe. Thank you all.